Welcome back to another episode of Accountants of Safety Change My Mind. Today we have the gorgeous Marcus Baston with us today. Baston.
It happens a lot.
Me getting on with words mixed up. But Marcus is a special guest today because, for those who listen to the show semi-regularly, Marcus is from Swoop, and Swoop have been one of our sponsors in the past. So I am so delighted to have them on as a guest again. So welcome to the show, Marcus.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So for those who don't know who you are, don't know who Swoop is or what Swoop is, would you like to give yourself a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Marcus, as you said. So I work at Swoop, and we are effectively a funding and savings platform that enables accountants to add more conversations and more value into what they deliver to clients. So that's from loans, grants, equity, and savings. Now, my background's in financial services, starting off with in NatWest, and progressed a lot through there into various sort of brokerages and bits like Capitalize that people might be aware of, and also Swoop more recently. I spend most of my time not really on the product side, but more focused on the implementation side with firms, because unfortunately these apps in the space aren't plug and play, and the implementation side is really important to make sure they're getting the most out of this. So looking at things like enabling the teams and looking at things like processes in the firm to make sure that you're delivering it as frequently as possible. Because one of the biggest things I find is that most of the firm's clients don't even know they do a lot of these services. So it's bedding it into where it's most appropriate to highlight to clients. So I'm always out and about trying to find better ways to utilize the broad product suite that Swoop offer in the best way to their clients.
So what does an average day look like for you?
Just basically not seeing much light between meetings, if I'm honest. So it's mixture of sort of these sorts of calls, so virtual calls with accounting firms, or even going out into their premises, which I probably prefer because you get a bit of a feel for the culture in the firm, and it's very lot easier to surface some of the challenges they're having around time or resource or whatever their biggest pain point at the time is. And from there, I can work out what the best next steps are from rolling out Swoop.
And I think spending time in practice is so useful. It gives you an entirely different perspective, because I think this home working malarkey, because we used to be old school and go into offices and stuff, but the home working is wonderful, so flexible, but there is a little bit of disjointedness, isn't there, when it comes to communication.
Absolutely.
So actually going in and seeing how a practice is run must give you a much better perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see how engaged they are. I think there are so many things going on. I'm guilty of it sometimes with notifications popping up in the background or Slack or whatever it is. I think to have that time and that focus time to understand where they're up to as a firm, because whilst on the face of it, they all look very, very similar. Under the bonnet, they're all at different stages of their journey. So it's understanding where they're up to and being a little bit empathetic of that. So they all have problems, no matter how big they are. It's just the bigger those problems are, just means there's more noughts at the end. They all have the very, very similar problems. They just cost more.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you work with clients, what kind of stuff do you go through with them? How do you help?
So there's loads of different ways. So we break it down into a few different areas. So people is a big part of where we start at. So understanding internally how confident and competent the team internally in the business are of actually picking up the phone and having a conversation with a client that isn't just about sort of retrospective financials. So being able to almost use some of the leading indicator data they have in the business, whether it be through management accounts, whatever they're doing with clients, to hopefully be able to predict needs for clients. And that sounds a little bit complex, but it's no more than seeing something like the debtor days increasing on a set of management accounts and knowing that there's a little bit of working capital requirement there for the business. And just be able to use that as a way to open up a conversation with the client to say, look, this is a problem. This is what it might turn into if we leave it. Should we have a conversation about trying to find ways to solve that? And funding can be part of that, or there's other ways you can solve those problems too.
So how do they, so there is two schools of thought. We have the compliance-driven accountants, always just focused on their end, never really kind of looking forward much. They just want to make sure all the data's in and it's done and it's legit. And then we have ones who want to offer, and I'm going to say the word advisory, but nobody knows what it means, or they haven't been able to explain it very clearly to me yet. And then we have like those kind of guys that just basically want to provide a better service. So I guess this is kind of going into the realms of providing that advisory level service, which is more dare I say it and use the word, proactive?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think even within that advisory thing, like you say, you can be right at the front where you are really proactive and you're having monthly calls with clients, but you can even be a little bit earlier on
Mm.
in that where it's just dealing with the inquiries as they come through. There is a little bit of, we find there's two different levels of it. You get the natural volume of advisory conversations where clients are kind of aware of what you do and they haven't really got any other people to speak to, and you've become that sort of trusted advisor, perhaps unintentionally
Mhm.
at times. And that's a bit of an agony aunt, but also a little bit of business advice as well. Or you,
I hear the agony aunt angle quite
absolutely.
often.
And there's the more upper end, which is you've got clear KPIs and metrics that you run for clients, and it's a way for you to predict and use those leading indicators to predict a need, hopefully, along with
Mm.
conversations and understanding their challenges as well. So there is a huge range.
Yeah. So when you're sitting with clients, are you or what should the firm be focused on? I mean, or to introduce this to them, what should they be focused on? Is it the size of the companies that they're working with, the ambitions of the companies? Like, what are the triggers to say, do you know what, we need to have more active conversations?
Absolutely. I think it's really about understanding what your clients' goals are. I think, like anything, I think you touched on it before, is that people don't work with SMEs because they just like working with SMEs. There's usually a reason after that is you want them to achieve something, and people don't always start a business
Yeah.
because they want to start a business. It's to have some level of freedom or whatever the end goal is. And I think it's almost getting to that point to tap into why they're actually doing it, whether it is the highest profits in the world and you want loads of cash, or it is just to have a
Yeah.
little bit of freedom to only work 2 days a week and be able to take your kids on holidays twice a year. So I think that's a good starting point,
Mm.
really, is to understand at a high level what your client personas are and where they're actually looking to move to. Because you might have really high
Mm.
performing investment backed companies or just loads of lifestyle companies. They'll have needs still,
Yeah.
but it's just working out what their personal drivers are. And even,
Mm.
I'm sorry.
Do you find that when you're working with accountants who have a varied
Hmm.
portfolio, some highly ambitious, some like backed by funders and so forth, and then others that are
Hmm.
lifestyle, do you find that they get a bit overwhelmed and confused about what kind of value they're offering because it can be so different depending on their
Yeah,
audience?
absolutely. I mean, part of that is perhaps how intentional they are with who their clients are, and
Mm.
perhaps the problems they are solving. Because we talk about niching a lot, and I actually do it quite a lot from the marketing side of things as well. But niching isn't always industry niche. I think everyone goes to industry niche and think, I don't want to only work with construction clients or only work with healthcare clients.
Yeah,
But someone
yeah.
like,
It's almost a lazy way of niching
yeah, I think
now.
it is. And I think sometimes I was speaking to a friend the other day, and they really enjoy working with creatives. And I was like, okay, well, what is it about that industry that you like? So, well, they are out the box thinkers, but they're also find it very hard to have framework and controls and bits in the business. So, and that typically ties into those like
Mm.
sort of neurodiverse folk out there, that they are very creative and incredible in ways to build new things and build businesses. But when it comes to actually the finer details of finance, that's how they can outsource that to
Mm.
them, and that's where they add the most value. The thing is understanding where in that
Yeah.
client's life you're adding the most value, and trying to expand that a bit more.
Yeah, it's I mean that wasn't Jenny Hollyoak, was it? Because one of my captains, Jenny, that's her exact audience. She wants to go after the creatives, but not creatives. And we're not. This isn't a conversation about niching, but not creatives in the way of you're a web designer or you are an arty person or
Hmm.
anything like that. Creatives is in idea driven,
Interesting.
like not necessarily analytical, not necessarily process driven, but idea driven. And I think that was her. Like she calls them
Yeah.
unicorns. So the unicorns in business are ones who just have these magical ideas. And that's a really
Yeah.
interesting niche. Shocking for SEO
Yeah.
because it's not, like from a marketing perspective, shocking because it's not specific enough. But as a niche, as an audience, it's fantastic. I
Absolutely.
love it.
I think from
Love
that
it.
you can
But then you get to know their
absolutely, and
problems,
that's what I was
right?
about to say. I think from that you can then spin it in terms of what is it you're actually solving for that client. Because I think one of the problems,
Mm.
particularly with we find, is that they go, well, none of my clients have come to me for a loan. But like, loan is more of a medium to solve a problem. So what is it you're actually trying to solve? What you're actually trying to solve for that client? And I think understanding,
Mm.
the value you're giving, and therefore the problems you can then solve for that client is really key. So without that, that's
Yeah,
quite hard.
yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So what about the risks of not the risks? No, I'm going to say it. What about the risks of asking personal questions, because I think that's going to be an objective and a boundary for people. Sometimes asking questions is uncomfortable. So what do you say to those guys?
Those questions, I think, need to happen, and I think perhaps it's a way for you to just frame it in a way that you're not here to understand their darkest secrets necessarily, but I think you almost need to have a sense of like empathy and understanding of, I know that I work with 10 clients in a very similar industry. These are typically the challenges that they face. How does that play with you? And almost invite them to come to you with their own challenges. You don't need to kind of poke around yourself, but I think almost going like, I work with these clients in a similar industry. Does that apply to you at all? And how are you solving their problems? Because you're going to get a win-win. You're going to get a win-win from that. Either they have solved it, and great, you've got now, you can go back and cross-pollinate that across the rest of your clients to go, this is how my other clients solved all these problems, or they're going to have the same problems, and you know that those now 11 clients all have very similar problems. So when you do go to DAS or Accountex, you know exactly what you're looking for, rather than being overwhelmed by all these apps that are out there. And there's thousands of us. But to have a bit more focus in terms of, I'm here to solve problems for at least 10 of my clients this time.
Yeah, that is a fantastic way of looking at events, because you do go to these events and the stands there are like incredible. The energy is so high and it's overwhelming, and you can't talk to everybody, you can't see everybody. So going there with a bit of a game plan about like, how do I use this experience to help my clients? That's a really gold piece of advice.
It's very easy for a firm, I think, to put loads of bits in place that, and reporting's a good one. And reporting and forecasting is a good example of this, that they put things in place where it really helps them out. But is it a way for them to deliver that to a client so they understand it? Perhaps not. Most people's opinion is that Excel is the ultimate place to do a forecast. But to a layman SME, and I'm thinking my dad when I think of this, if he looked at an Excel spreadsheet, he'd run a mile. He runs a tool hire business, and he doesn't know what a lot of these numbers mean. But if you're going to deliver that through something like a Fathom or a Futurely, where you've got a lot more visuals on there, and you can understand, well, if that bar moves down, I haven't done this thing right. It's easy for them to understand it. So I think sometimes you can confuse functionality with the actual use case, which sometimes is just a method for you to deliver it in a way that your clients understand.
Yeah, I mean, even with my own spreadsheets, I still use a traffic light system. Because I like to be visual.
No, I'm exactly the same. It's good to have those sort of a bit of a dashboard and see what's going on, but also get under the numbers as well when needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the other kind of things that an accountant can do when they're in this kind of discovery phase of exploring the needs of their clients? How do we open up conversation?
So I think, like I say, it's starting off with where they want to get to. And I think from that is understanding within their business, what are the things that stop you from doing that? Because I think whilst a lot of firms like to go to the point where they're doing monthly management accounts and monthly reporting and get a better view of their business, that's quite hard, I think, in the short term for a small business to kind of touch and feel and feel like it's a tangible piece of work. So when you are putting the pricing out or a proposal out for that, they can then compare and then going, that's expensive. Rather than going in, what is taking up all of your time in the business? Well, actually, I spend 2 days a month making payments to suppliers. Okay, well, let's try and eliminate that as a pain point, because your 2 days, what's your hourly rate, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer? Oh, my hourly rate is probably £50 an hour. So how much is that costing you on top of making payments with that problem? I think it's working out, at least in the first instance, where they're spending all of their time, because chances are it's not on the business.
Yeah.
So it's trying to remove those distractions. My dad does it a lot. He'll spend the whole weekend trying to shave £5 off of his insurance bill or whatever it might be. My dad just spend 2 days to save £5. That's not a good use of your time. In the same way you outsource. But in the same way you'd outsource like your bookkeeping, because that isn't a good use of your time, and it's likely inaccurate or whatever those things are. Is to outsource some of those other bits as well through to your business advisor.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. We one of the captains recently quoted 3 times higher than their competitor who was quoting at the same time, and the bloke was like, "I really like what you're saying, but why would I use you if you're 3 times higher?" And the captain was able to go back and do exactly what you just said and say, well, actually, we've looked at this. We're going to save you time. We're going to save you this money. We're going to add this value. And that's why you're going to pay us 3 times higher.
Incredible.
And they signed up. Because you can do it, because you can demonstrate your value. And you can't demonstrate your value
Yeah.
unless you
And be
ask
confident
questions,
in your
right?
own self. I think sometimes we almost see ourselves as a bit of a, say ourselves, but whether it's apps or accountants, it's a bit of a sort of charity or a bit of a service that people just use and abuse. But I think there's a lot of value added in that. And you're right. I think having a clear value proposition to understand what value you do provide, it's not about giving reporting, but it's about giving clarity on what's happening for the next 18 months in your business. It's saving you time and allowing you to focus on growing it and hopefully exiting at some point, and not having all your clients depend on just you. And that applies to accounting firms as well.
And
Yeah,
doing the accounting.
it's very
Like the
important.
accounting is the thing that attracts them. The value is
Absolutely.
everything else that you can do. So what happens if you are, and I see this in companies a lot as well, if you're the leader of the company or the leader of the firm, and you go through all these events and you learn all of this stuff, and you know what you want to achieve in the business and how you're going to help clients, but you have a team of people. It doesn't necessarily filter through, does it? So how do you talk to companies or firms
with
teams?
This happens a lot, and doesn't really have a particular size of firm that it applies most to, but taken like a sole practitioner, it happens probably more frequently, is that you end up having all the client relationships having to feed into them, because or combination of two things. The perception is that the technical team can't have these conversations, and part of it is you've not really allowed them to. You haven't created a space where you can have that sort of small amounts of exposure to build their confidence and start to build relationships with clients. That's why all the relationships tend to hang with that sole practitioner, is because they've not given the trust and not given the space for the team to engage with that. And leveraging 5 members of staff versus one person is naturally going to have a much bigger impact. But it is a leap, and I appreciate it's a little bit of a challenge to get the juniors up to where you want them to get to. But I've seen a lot of firms start to create a little bit of resentment between the sole practitioner and the team, because they don't go out and hunt for new business how they do, or they don't have the same passion that they do. And I think sometimes that's about adapting to the Gen Z, Gen X generations, that values are a little bit different, but you can still get them to that point. It's just how you work with them to do that.
I've always had a lot of pushback when it comes to it's including the team in marketing activities. So, and this is not just typical for accounting firms. I'm going back to like the legal days and previous to that as well, where the team would say, "I'm not coming to work to be a marketer. I don't want to promote the company. I want to come in and do my job and go home, and that's that." But when you do find you can get the team on board, having conversations, posting on LinkedIn, like doing stuff, your brand assets go through the roof. So have you experienced that as well? Do you get pushback from the team, or is it
I agree,
just
it's both.
bottleneck
I think if you ever say the word
leader?
sales to any accounting firm and go, you to go out and sell this product, you go, we didn't train to be an accountant to be a salesperson. Like that's the biggest pushback we get, and that's from big firms to the small firms. It's like, we're not here to be salespeople. It's a bit really.
Yeah. You should have been there the day that I called a bunch of lawyers salespeople.
I bet.
I bet.
And sales is a bit of a dirty word, and I think like everyone's a salesman, in my opinion. You have to do that, and really it's a way for you to convey value, or to communicate some level of value, to help the client understand why you're even having that conversation, and also why you've chosen them as a client. Hopefully you have chosen them as a client. It's not just a reactive, you've had to take them on, but you should have some level of choice, I think, with that. I think it's for you to then educate them on why you've chosen them, what value you provide, and therefore what that means to their business. It's all really about communication. It's not necessarily a hard sell or that Wolf of Wall Street type mentality. It's better communication, I think.
Yeah. I think this all comes back down to understanding your segments and understanding that like niching is such a restrictive word. I prefer to call it strategic. Otherwise, it's disappeared from my head entirely. But your strategic focus. So I call it finding your focus. So we go through a process of making sure that we get rid of anyone we don't want, and then we're left with segments. And I don't think firms need to niche these days to be able to provide value, but they do need to understand each segment and how they add value to each segment. And then, like, the world's your oyster. You can have 100 segments if you want. Like, you just need to know
we're the same.
the
Like, we do it
value
at our
of
place.
each of them.
So in reality, everyone could use Swoop. Like whether you're an accountant, whether you're a window cleaner, you can absolutely use it. But we have an ideal client profile where we know that we add the most value, particularly on our team where we're Swoop for advisors, and we call it advisors intentionally, is because not everyone is at the position, particularly an accountant, bookkeeper, or FD, where you have positioned yourself as an advisor. So you might be still be going through the digital evolution of the business, where you're going from a very paper-based to automated, like Will Farnell's digital firm. Maybe you're in that sort of phase, which is fine, and you're freeing up time to have these conversations. Is Swoop right for you right there? Maybe, but probably not. We add the most value to those firms that have automated some or most of what they can. They've freed up capacity in the team. The team are now seeing all this innovation in the practice, thinking, God, what can we do with all this? And it's now then plugging in a range of products or solutions to be able to deliver that. I think if you try and fast track that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is they should be really
absolutely. So yeah, both. I think when I first come into this industry, one of the first things I read was pay setters, which was the adoption of Xero and all the Wow company and bits that did around that, and also the digital firm. So how firms are trying to automate. I mean, Funnel Clark did an amazing job, almost super automated their practice, but have now freed up capacity in the business to now deliver value, but also have the data and insights to deliver that value properly. So it isn't just a finger in the wind. It's we know that you need this service or need a solution for this problem.
It certainly sounds like a lot of work to an outsider. Is it a lot of work? Like you work with the firms?
It is if you try and do it all in one go.
Is it a lot of work?
I think there's definitely phases to it or stages to it. I think it's working out what is it's almost like that. I can't think of the matrix for it, but what's the highest return for the lowest time in, and work it and just for almost like prioritizing it. Because like you say, the sole practitioner goes back into the office with 5 or 6 apps and a bag full of merch, thinking, blimey, we're going to get calls from all these app vendors. We better start working out how we're going to do this. But you need to sit down with a team to go, okay, here's all the solutions in the market. What is the biggest impact to our client base right now? And invite the team to kind of solve that with you, rather than going, I think we should do this because I was told we should do this. Do this. Because you're going to get resistance, I think, from the team.
Yeah, you're going to get burnout as well, because everybody's going to tell you to do something different, and you'll just constantly be in a loop of trying new stuff without actually thinking, where is this going to add value? And I think the other, speaking on the other side of the coin, the software people that I've spoken to in the past, like they come in and it's all like high energy. We're going to implement this thing. It's going to be great. It's going to work amazing. Our client's going to love us. And then it peters out, just kind of dwindles out. So how do you kind of keep on adding value?
Yeah, I think it's keep that for me anyway. It's part of it is about building it into your process. So whether it is at the point of onboarding, or whether it is at the point of quarterly or annual check-ins of clients, is to have that so it complements your conversations and core offering. All these other apps and bells and whistles should really be complementing your core offering, which is an outsourced accounting function or finance function within the business. So I think it's the focus on that part really, is to make sure that it complements what you do. Because without that, you get to December and January, and your focus is completely shifted because you've got a wall of self-assessment tax returns to do. You've got 2 weeks short in December. You've got that April in 3 months where you've got a new tax year, so you've got to communicate all the changes that Rishi has or hasn't agreed to send out. So it's making sure, and then you've got to go back 2 days later when they turn around and then pull those changes back, like double cabs and stuff. So wherever you don't, it's I can't remember the saying, but it's almost like you fall back to your systems when these things, when your focus shifts elsewhere. So I think embedding it into a process is key. There are things that are very ad hoc. There are things you can just build in as a service that is followed from a very, very clear process.
And I think the point you were talking about when we were talking about the teams as well, your processes, if you have clearly defined processes, especially for any client communication touch points and so forth, you will empower your team, because it's not just permission, it's guidance on how to and when, and like the client almost knows and expects that call to come in,
expectations for clients have gone up a lot. They're hearing all these amazing things like AI and automation, and it's not just in this industry we see it's in every industry. So when they're starting to look at what are quite traditional industries like accountancy perhaps or law, which are very, very traditional industries, they're sort of thinking, why aren't you guys picking up and trying to innovate and do bits. Their expectations are increased. So, and I've got I always say the saying is, if you're not having these conversations with clients, it doesn't mean they're not having the conversations at all. Someone else is. So whether it's their friend, this mythical Dave at the pub, or whether it is another accountancy practice, that they're all risks to you, and it all devalues what you're actually there for.
Yeah, it's quite amazing actually how many clients are lost because you didn't have a conversation. They're having a conversation with somebody's like, oh, did you know that we can do this, this, and this and save you loads of money? And they're like, why hasn't my accountant spoken to me about that? I'm going to move. And that's how you get the retention numbers can be so low. It's not so low. That's the wrong way of saying it. But that's how you retain more clients.
And it's about having different hooks to have the conversation with. Like the chance of you going out to a BNI meeting or a networking meeting, and at that moment in time you catch that business just that week that their accountants annoyed them, is probably quite slim. But if you're constantly asking questions about different ways that you can help through, I mean, using Swoop examples, but like grants or energy savings, or those things that aren't your typical accountancy services, it's very hard for them to compare like for like with their existing accountants. When their accountant does let them down or not do something they expect, they're thinking, well, this guy is completely better. Like there's almost incomparable with what my current accountant's doing. It's just having more hooks to more conversations you can bring in-house.
So after the introduction of services, that you've gone through the kind of discovery phase, you've understood what their problems are. You've gone, these services are really good for you. But at that moment in time, the person who's prescribed this solution is still not a salesperson. What do you say about the follow-up kind of method and process that you should go through with the client? Because I've got a feeling, and people are more than welcome to DM me and tell me if I'm wrong, but I've got a feeling that you'll probably just stick it out on this little ledge and say, oh, we can find you funding, and then you'll run away. And then they'll never have that conversation again. But they've said it, so it's out there.
So I think for that
what do you think about the
I try and compare it. The analogy that I quite like is like the GP type one. So I think accountants are almost like a little bit of a general practitioner, almost like a medical version, right? Is where they're there to diagnose the problem and then refer off to a particular specialist to solve that particular problem. Because your GP isn't going to whip out the scalpel and start inspecting you. But they will have a bit of a feel about and then press on that pain to make sure it's definitely in that spot. I think that's something worth doing when you play back that to the client to go, just so I'm clear on what we discussed today, you told me that you want to get to this moment or this point in your business. Now we've known that because you're doing these things currently, that's actually stopping you from getting there. And if you don't get there, this is what it means for you. This is the pain. You can stay where you are in this sort of region of, it's good enough, but not bad enough for me to make a change. Or we can get to this point where you've told me we're going to get to that actual objective. You've been trading for 5 years and you've got nowhere closer to that. To almost play back to them why we had this conversation. It's not here to hard sell or force a client to do anything, but I think it's important to link the pain or the frustration with the solution. The features and benefits are great, but unless you're tying it into an emotion, people buy emotionally, irrelevant of what sector you're in. So if you're tying it back into an emotion, you've got a much higher chance of converting that into a fee, because you've allowed the client to feel heard in that conversation.
Yeah. This throws into question then about rewards for referrals, because some accountants love them as an extra source of income. Some vehemently hate them and they think that it's unethical to do this. So
often,
where do you sit in that
there's a few
line?
different
And
parts
is that
of that, really. I mean,
that you come
the
across?
ACCA and ICW and other governing bodies don't always make it too clear what you can and can't do when it comes to commissions. In reality, it's all about making sure you don't have an influence on that. So you aren't necessarily picking this particular provider to say that this is the best one in the market. You should only go here because I'm receiving money for it. And that's what they're trying to eradicate for that. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, because I'm sure I'll get a DM from someone at ICW saying that you shouldn't say. Yeah, exactly. But in a nutshell, it is that. And I think a lot of it's down to your transparency and process and making sure you are engaging properly and all that kind of stuff. But on the ethical lens, there's, picking something like funding, for example, right, which is probably the simplest one to understand. Upon success, typically a lender will pay out a commission. And then the way that we do it with our firms, we pay them like a revenue share back. So they receive a revenue share as part of that from us. Now, they're thinking, well, I shouldn't be doing that. It should be a value-add service to my clients. But someone's going to be taking that anyway. The lenders build this into their pricing anyway. So it typically isn't the charge, typically for the most part, isn't charging the client anymore. But it's a way for you to actually have the equity within those fees to actually have these conversations. Margins are tight anyway. The amount of firms I speak to with their margins are so small that they have to stack it high with client numbers because they haven't built in the margin. People would for a lot anyway, would much prefer having a smaller client base with larger fees, but they found it quite hard to get to that point. I think building in things like commission shares and stuff is a key part of that. But I do understand the ethical part of it. But there are controls in place to limit that, where it does become a little bit silly.
I think there is a lot of effort that goes into shaping the culture of a team, shaping your own mindset into the sales mindset, and kind of encouraging your clients to uptake on software and services that are not yours. And there is probably fear that if we're going to put all of this effort in, if this is going to be like the change that we're making, who am I doing it for? And yet I think for me, it's coming back to the value that you're adding to that client, because if you can help your client grow from 100,000 to 300,000 to 500,000, your fees are going to grow.
Absolutely.
Your longevity is going to grow.
I see it as almost like the advisory type stuff. And I say that because it's a bit of a stretch term, and sometimes almost seems a little bit unattainable. Like it's this top of the advisory mountain no one can ever get to. But it's almost like, so we have a customer success team in Swoop, so that's what I spend my time doing. And it's a very similar way to that. Like my metrics of success is lifetime value of a client, retention of clients, and making sure they have the best adoption of our services possible. And very similar to an accountancy practice. Like their thing is to retain the client as long as possible, increase them recurring revenue as much as they can do, and to deliver the highest value to make sure that client, because a lot of their way you price is based on the size of business or how successful they are. If you're removing the barriers of their success, your core fees are going to go up anyway. So the number of transactions you do through bookkeeping is going to increase. Their payroll numbers are going to increase. So unless you enabling that or finding a way to enable that is only going to better everything else. I think if you can earn commissions and bits alongside that, then even better.
I mean, we've all got to come to the conclusion that money is good in the right hands, right? Even one of my captains, and you know who you are.
Are they a spender? Was that reference there? Oh, no.
No. It's
I see.
Scott, bless him, the anti-capitalist accountant.
Absolutely.
But no, money in the right hands is a good thing. So let's get money in the hands of accountants, because quite frankly, you are the best people to serve to serve our community. So we're going to bring this to an end. But Marcus,
it's a good question. It's one I hadn't thought about before. You just asked it just now, I'll be honest. And I've watched so many of these episodes, I should have been prepared. I think my biggest thing around that is probably the impact they can have. And that's a broad thing, but I think the biggest thing is they don't know how much impact they can have. They do kind of know it, but I think the untapped potential in this space is huge. And I think that's what I would say is what makes them the most attractive or sexy, however you put that, sexy is the untapped potential.
Well, I phrase it as sexy. Yeah. I think you and I are on the same wavelength. Impact. So I really do appreciate you coming on. I'm going to point people to your LinkedIn profile, I assume, and Swoop for advisors as well, so you can go and check out what Swoop are up to.
Thanks for having me.
But thank you very much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.